Hey guys, welcome back! This main street in Lower Town is really starting to come together now we've added the market and the tea room, but it's not quite done yet. There are still two major places left on this street, and today I want to tackle one of those. Namely, these houses over here. As you can tell from the footprints, these houses are going to be much smaller than our terrace over behind the market, and that is because this is definitely the poorer end of town. I mean, no one in Lower Town is rich, but this is going to be the less desirable area, which means smaller houses and probably some other knock-on effects too. But we can explore those consequences properly once we've actually built the houses. So, let's get building! This is exactly the sort of vibe that I was going for, and I think some of the consequences of being the poorer end of town are probably already quite evident. To start, we have a thinner, much less travelled and more run-down path that leads towards the houses because it's mostly only used by those who actually live here, and the town, well, they apparently can't be bothered to give them a nice, properly paved path to get to their front doors, so a dirt track it is. Plus the surrounding area is, I think, a bit more wild with more tall grass and ferns and less of the flowers, which shows that the town doesn't put much effort into keeping it looking good. However, we still have the traditional window boxes which are looking lovely because the people who live here do still very much take pride in their homes. It's more that the town itself doesn't provide as much support to this area as it does to other places. Then I really wanted the street to feel quite closed and cramped without making the space between them super small, and I think somehow these hanging signs really add to that effect. I guess because they're low down and therefore in your eye line, it just makes the whole street feel a lot smaller. In my head, they're kind of like washing lines going between the houses, but you can imagine them to be whatever works for you. And then the final detail, which I really quite like, is that all of these houses have chimneys, and this was a very deliberate decision. I did this partly because I do love the look of a chimney, but I think it also does add to the slightly run-down feel of the area. Maybe it's because it feels like the street would be a bit smoky and unpleasant from everyone burning their fireplaces to keep warm. I have a feeling that everywhere else in town has some other, much cleaner but more expensive way of heating their homes. But I think that's probably enough talk about the exteriors of these houses. It's time we turn our attention inside because while they are pretty small, there is still plenty of space to bring these homes to life. So, let's get decorating! I always find it so interesting how much better the outside of buildings look when the interiors are decorated. I know that sounds dumb, but even just getting those little glimpses through the windows just immediately makes the street feel alive, let alone when you actually walk through the doors. And when you do walk through the doors, then of course each house has its own details. Like with the other larger terraced houses, I wanted to make sure that all of these houses felt like they were built by the same people at the same time, but still had their own characteristics. In this case, we are of course working with a much smaller space, but even in a small footprint like this, there is still room to change things up and make them feel different with different colour furnishings, different paintings, or just different placements for the furniture. The main thing is that I really wanted to create a kind of studio apartment vibe where all the essential things are crammed into a small space. And since this is Minecraft, the main things I wanted to prioritise were a bed, which is always slightly shielded from the rest of the room to give at least a bit of privacy, a seating area so the inhabitants always have somewhere to sit down, some form of storage, whether it's chests or barrels so there's somewhere to put their belongings, and some sort of kitchen working area type space so they can also craft and cook food and all that good stuff. Another thing which is present in all of the houses is of course the fireplace, but we have a lot less variation with those. We do have a couple of slightly different ones, like one in a corner, but overall we've kept them the same. But that makes sense to me. It feels like something that would be done when the house was built, and therefore would be relatively standard across the entire terrace, or well, street I suppose. If I had to pick a favourite house, I think it would probably be this one. Maybe it's the large rug or the corner kitchen, I'm not quite sure, but something about this just speaks to me as soon as I walk inside. Although I do have a soft spot for this house with the bed up on the platform, since this house is in the middle of the terrace on the side facing the wall, the people who live here unfortunately only have their two front-facing windows. But it did give them space for a little bit of verticality, which is very nice, and definitely makes the bedroom feel even more private than the other ones do. But as is always the way, there are bits of each different house that I just love, so my favourite will probably change again by the end of the week. But speaking of endings, I think I'm going to leave this episode here. I am so happy with how this street turned out, but I have to admit I am looking forward to next episode even more, because we are finally going to be decorating under the stairs. I've almost definitely hyped it up way too much because I've mentioned it quite a few times now, but I do really like the way it's shaping up in my design, so I am very much looking forward to that. So until then, thank you guys for watching, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!